The Lost Track of Time, Chapter 13. Officer 10 escorted Dill and Penelope to a counter at the far end of the terminal. A few people stopped to stare at them, and Dill smiled and nodded politely. "For goodness sake, stop that!" scolded Officer 10. "This isn't a parade." He tried to glare up at Dill, but he was too short. He ended up glaring at Dill's belt buckle, which didn't do much to improve his mood. At the counter, Officer 10 was officially assigned to Dill and Penelope's case and given a stack of forms to fill out. After each one was properly signed, stamped, and filed, Officer 10 turned and pointed to a set of double doors to their right. "March!" Penelope didn't feel the least bit like marching, but she followed Dill's lead and marched all the same. Dill's legs were so long he reached the doors first. "Stop!" Officer 10 screamed at him, and ran to catch up. He arrived with a red face and his shirt untucked. "Forget marching!" He rearranged his uniform and badge, and then pushed past Dill. He brought out a large set of keys, found the right one, and the doors opened with a groan. Inside was a long, dimly lit hallway filled with doors. Each door was exactly like the others except for the sign posted above it. "Crime units," declared Officer 10, pointing at the signs. "Dawdling, dilly-dallying, feet-dragging, frittering, lollygagging, and puttering. Never forget," he said, fixing them both with a stare. "The clockworkers of the realm are everywhere, protecting the populace against the evils of time-wasters." Once the doors swung open and Penelope caught a glimpse inside. Rows and rows of desks filled a long room. Men and women dressed in identical blue coveralls sat upright at the desks. They looked exactly like the people Penelope had seen in the terminal. They were all typing in unison. Click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. They struck each key at precisely the same time. How did they do that? Penelope wondered before the door closed and the scene vanished. At the end of the hall, another set of double doors waited for them. As they approached, the doors slid open with a hiss to reveal a cavernous courtroom. Low fixtures dropped yellow pools of light on a massive podium at the far end of the room. Two figures sat expectantly at the podium. Their nameplates read Judge Just Right and Judge Just So. An enormous 60-second stopwatch hung on the wall behind the judges. Under the stopwatch, a sign declared "Justice in under a minute." The judges perked up at the sight of the new arrivals. "Don't just stand there, we don't have all day," screeched Judge Just So. "Time's a-wastin'," shrieked Judge Just Right, motioning Dill and Penelope to approach. Once they were standing in front of the judges, Dill spoke up. "Your Honors." "Silence!" barked Judge Just So, and slammed her gavel on the podium. Bam! "Silence!" repeated Judge Just Right, and slammed her gavel. Bam! "I said silence!" Bam! Bam! "I said silence!" Bam! 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 The two judges shouted and banged until both of their faces went red. This might have gone on all day if Officer 10 hadn't cleared his throat with a cough. The banging stopped. The gavels hung in the air. "Well," said Judge Just Right, "speak up." Officer 10 stepped forward, his chest outthrust. "These two citizens were caught idling at an intersection on the outskirts of Kronos City." Judge Just Right fixed Dill with a stare. "And what do you have to say for yourself?" "Your Honors," Dill said again, this time with a deep bow, "we were simply eating breakfast when—" "Likely story!" screamed Judge Just Right. Bam! went the gavel. "As for you, young lady," she said, pointing at Penelope, "what were you doing idling at an intersection?" Before Penelope could say a word, Judge Just So picked up a large black book from a shelf below her podium. She adjusted her glasses and read solemnly, "Be always ashamed to catch thyself idle." Judge Just Right snatched her own book out. "Trouble springs from idleness." "The busy man has few idle visitors," interrupted Judge Just So. To the boiling pot the flies come not. Penelope groaned. She had the feeling she had heard all this before. The judges stopped their squalling and looked at her expectantly. Go on, demanded Judge Just So. Tell us what you were doing. Penelope knew better than to mention their search for the great Moodler. Before she could think of the right thing to say, she heard herself answer, Nothing. Guilty! Both judges shouted, leaping from their seats and frantically fighting to start the stopwatch. Judge Just So hit the button first and began the sentencing. For idling at an intersection. Tick, tick, tick. And for doing absolutely nothing, snarled Judge Just Right. Tick, tick, tick. You are hereby sentenced to 20 minutes, tick, 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 around the clock. Bring! The sound of the stopwatch filled the room. Take them away! That wasn't so bad, thought Penelope, as Officer 10 ushered them out of the courtroom and into a waiting elevator. They were only sentenced to 20 minutes around the clock. She wasn't sure what that meant, but she knew she should put up with almost anything. She could put up with almost anything for 20 minutes. Once inside the elevator, the doors slid shut and the compartment rushed soundlessly upward. Penelope watched through a small window as the great city flashed by. The higher they went, the smaller the city became, until the buildings looked like toy blocks. She glanced over at Dill. He raised one eyebrow and tapped his forehead. She tapped back. See, there was nothing to worry about. They were both working on their next move. The elevator lurched to a stop, and the doors opened with a cheerless ding. This way, said Officer 10, pointing down an empty hallway toward a thick metal door. The door had a glass-plated window set a few feet from the floor, exactly the right height for Officer 10 to peer through. He pressed his face against the window pane and gave a satisfied grunt before unlocking it. He motioned Dill and Penelope inside and flipped a switch. A few lonely light bulbs sputtered to life, revealing a long corridor flanked by rows and rows of bars. Welcome to prison, Officer 10 said. It was the first time he sounded happy. This is the North Clock Tower, where we keep the most serious offenders. He began to stroll down the corridor. Musty odors, meager lighting, plenty of bedbugs. You should be right at home. Penelope shuddered, which seemed to make him even happier. He continued his list with gusto. Tasteless meals, creaky noises, not to mention rock-hard beds. Dill stopped to peer through the bars of a cell and waved Penelope over. The cell was empty except for a bunch of soft gray fluff balls. But these weren't ordinary fluff balls. Each one had a pair of small bare feet and large black sleepy eyes. Some of them floated lazily in the air, though most of them were piled in the corner like snowdrifts. A few opened their eyes to look at the new inmates and then closed them again, falling immediately back to sleep. Did you say your most serious offenders are here? Asked Dill. Can't imagine these dust bunnies are much of a threat. Officer 10 wheeled around. Then stop imagining. It's illegal. He shoved them away from the cell and pointed to a large sign hanging from its door. Danger, do not feed. Approach at your own risk. I would mind that if I were you, he said. Now keep moving. As they walked down the corridor, Penelope noticed that every cell was filled with the same creatures and posted with the same warning sign. There was one empty cell at the end of the corridor. Officer 10 quickly unlocked it. Home sweet home, he said, and pushed them inside with a nasty snicker before slamming the door shut. See you soon, he called out, and disappeared back down the hall. See you in 20 minutes, Penelope called back, and then turned to Dill. All right, what's our plan? What should we do when our time is up and they let us out? Dill looked uncertain. I'm not sure we will get out. Those judges are tricky, cunning, unmistakably sly. I think it best we start looking for a chance to escape. Dill began to pace the length of the cell, tapping on walls and rattling the bars, checking for possible weaknesses. You go right ahead, said Penelope. I'll join you in a minute. Actually, she thought to herself, I'll join you in 20 minutes. Surely Dill was overreacting. They would be free soon. After all, they had done absolutely nothing. Penelope glanced around the cell. A rickety wooden table with 4 chairs sat in the middle of the room. 2 benches that doubled as beds lined the walls on either side. She was just sitting down on one of the benches when she noticed a gigantic mass of cobwebs in a nearby corner. She got up and moved to the chair farthest away. Dill, on the other hand, went straight up to the cobwebs to get a better look. He was bending over the mass, just about to prod it with an outstretched finger, when a small voice interrupted his examination. "Excuse me, do you have a hanky?" Penelope nearly fell out of her chair, and Dill took a giant step back. After a moment, Dill regained his composure and his manners. "Certainly," he said, and produced a neatly folded handkerchief from his front pocket. He held it out toward the cobwebs. A small hand, matching the small voice, reached out and took the hanky with a polite, "Thank you." Penelope eased over to the corner to get a closer look. Another hand popped out. It was holding a pair of glasses. The first hand began wiping the glasses clean with Dill's handkerchief. After the glasses were spotless, the hand with the hanky began wiping cobwebs off what soon became a face. The face was covered almost entirely of hair. Bushy eyebrows, a monstrously large mustache, and an ancient trailing beard. Once he cleaned his face, more or less, the man offered Dill his hanky back. "Ew," thought Penelope. The hanky was filthy, but Dill didn't skip a beat. "It's yours to keep," he said with a neat bow. "Oh, you're so kind," said the man, tucking the hanky back into the mess of cobwebs. "Only the very nicest people come to prison here, if I may say so." "You may," said Dill. "Thank you, I believe I will." The strange man cleared his throat and said again with great feeling, "Only the very nicest people come to prison here." He smiled at Dill and Penelope as if they were his dearest friends. Penelope couldn't help but smile back. The man got to his feet, and after several moments of dusting and brushing and straightening his decrepit tie, he took Penelope's hand and gave it a kiss. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the timekeeper." "It's very nice to meet you," said Penelope, who was surprised to discover she meant what she said. Despite his startling appearance, the timekeeper was delightful. Dill, however, looked shocked. "Mr. Timekeeper," he said, giving the man's hand a vigorous shake, "I never expected to find you here. You have one of the most powerful jobs in all the realm." Penelope turned to look at Dill and then back at the little man. Him? Powerful? She didn't believe it. "Well," said the timekeeper, "you might say I'm taking time off." "Please," he said, motioning toward the table, "have a seat. I'll tell you all about it." The 3 inmates took their seats, and the timekeeper let out a satisfied sigh. "It's about time I got up off the floor. I've been sitting there forever, give or take a day." "Forever?" replied Penelope. "That's quite a long while." "Now that I think about it," continued the timekeeper, "I might have been there only a few weeks. Actually, I have no idea how long I've been sitting on that floor. I've completely lost track of time, which is exactly why I ended up in the prison in the first place." "Sounds serious," said Dill. "Oh, it is," he said grimly, "very serious. I used to be the official timekeeper for the entire realm. Do you have any idea how many different types of time there are? There's high time, big time, and fun time, down time, prime time, small time, short time, and dark times. There's time in, time out, time up, timetables, and time frames." Penelope's head began to swim, but the timekeeper went on. "There's any time and some time, the right time and the wrong time, good time, bad time, borrowed time, and due time. I used to keep track of them all. People would bring their spare time to the clock tower for safekeeping, and I would file it away. Now I couldn't tell you where the tiniest nanosecond went." "But what happened?" asked Dill. "I tripped and fell on hard times. I had a bump on my head for weeks." The timekeeper absent-mindedly rubbed a spot on his head as if remembering the traumatic event. "That could happen to anyone," offered Penelope. "True, agreed the timekeeper. But unfortunately it happened to me, and I haven't been the same since. From that day on, I wandered around and around in a daze, asking people if they had the time. Of course they didn't. That was my job. As you know, time will tell, and it wasn't long before Kronos heard the news. And you can't have a timekeeper who can't keep track of time. He locked me away as quick as you could say tick-tock. Now everyone is short on time. Kronos is so very stingy. He wouldn't give you the time of day if you asked him. The timekeeper sat silently for a moment, and then shook his head quickly, as if to dislodge a memory. He turned to Dill and Penelope and asked brightly, "And how long will you be staying?" "Well," said Penelope, "we were only sentenced to 20 minutes around the clock, so we should be out in no time." "I hate to tell you this," confided the timekeeper, "but no time is just a myth. So is a jiffy and the ever-popular just a moment. If someone says they'll be back in a jiffy, you know you're in for a wait. Everything takes longer than you think. That much I know. After being here for..." The timekeeper paused with a distressed look on his face. "For..." Dill and Penelope leaned forward expectantly. "For 5,000 years, he said triumphantly. "I've figured out a few things. Your prison sentence is connected to how much time you've wasted. Now then, exactly what are you in for?" "Idling," answered Penelope. "Well, this is how it works," continued the timekeeper cheerfully. "You're expected to work around the clock to make up for the time you lost idling. But what they don't tell you is that it can't be done. You could work for 20 minutes or 20 years. It won't matter. You can never make up for lost time." The timekeeper settled back in his chair and smiled pleasantly. "So, you see, you'll be here forever, just like me." Dill slammed the table with his fist. "I expected something tricky just like this." "This is a disaster!" cried Penelope. "This is not so bad," offered the timekeeper, gently patting her arm, "especially if you lose track of time. I'll be happy to show you how." And with that, the timekeeper buried his face in his beard and promptly fell asleep. Stay tuned next time for Chapter 14.